The watch that went backward. A young woman inherits a wristwatch that runs in reverse. As she wears it, she realizes that each backward minute undoes something in her life, an accident avoided, a forgotten argument, but at the same time, it brings to light dangers and secrets she never should have discovered. When I inherited the watch from my grandmother, I had no idea it would change my life in so many ways. It was an old watch, with a shiny metal surface and tiny engravings that seemed to tell stories. The first time I held it, a wave of nostalgia and longing washed over me. I looked at it, and for a brief moment, I could feel her presence, as if she were there beside me, whispering secrets from the past. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" my mother commented, while I rolled the watch between my fingers. She had a distant look in her eyes, as if she were lost in memories she didn't want to share. I wanted to ask about those memories, about what my grandmother was like, but the sadness in my mother's eyes made me hesitate. So, I simply nodded, trying to hide the curiosity that bubbled within me. That afternoon, as the sun began to set, I decided to take a walk in the yard. The soft light of dusk illuminated everything in a magical way. I went to an old tree where I used to play as a child. The watch hung from my wrist, and when I looked at it again, I noticed the hands were slowly moving backward. It was a subtle yet intriguing motion. "What are you trying to show me?" I murmured, almost expecting the watch to respond. But it didn't answer. The only thing I could feel was a strange, almost mystical connection. I sensed that my grandmother was there, watching over me, perhaps even encouraging me to move forward. What did that mean? I had no idea, but something inside me began to stir. The next day, I returned to school. The smell of chalk and paper was familiar, but the atmosphere felt different. As soon as I walked in, I heard laughter and whispers. I looked around and soon realized they were talking about me. "Look at Emily, with her weird style," one of the girls commented, and the others laughed. My heart ached in my chest. Those words felt like daggers. I tried to ignore the comments, but the truth was I felt isolated. I had always been the odd one out, the girl who preferred reading books over going to parties. My style was unique, but others didn't see it that way. With each step I took, I felt the weight of their gazes, as if they were judging me. Maybe I should change, I thought, but then corrected myself. I didn't want to mold myself into what others deemed acceptable. During physical education class, things worsened. When I attempted to run, I tripped and fell. Laughter echoed through the gym, and I felt small, as if I were disappearing. The teacher came to help me, but the humiliation was already done. What hurt the most was knowing that even when I tried to be myself, I was the target of jokes. Later, at home, I sat in my room with the watch still on my wrist. I looked at it, seeking comfort. Why doesn't anyone understand? I asked aloud, as if it could provide answers. Silence replied, but an idea sparked in my mind. What if I could go back and undo a mistake, a cursed conversation with my best friend, Samantha? I decided to experiment. With my heart racing, I closed my eyes and recalled the last time I fought with Samantha. We had argued over something trivial, but anger and pride drove us apart. I held the watch in my hands and felt an energy pulse as I murmured, "Go back." When I opened my eyes, everything seemed the same, but something inside me felt different. There was a lightness in the air, as if a cloud of tension had dissipated. I decided to call Samantha. The phone rang once, twice until I heard her voice. "Hi, Emily," she answered, a bit hesitantly. "Samantha, can we talk?" I asked, trying to hide my anxiety. "Of course, why not? We need to discuss what happened," she said, and I could sense her voice softening. We met at the park, where we used to spend hours talking and laughing. As soon as I saw her, a wave of relief washed over me. "I'm sorry for the fight," I said before she could say anything. "I didn't want it to happen." "I regret it too," Samantha replied as she sat down beside me. "Sometimes I just feel like you're so different, and that scares me." Different how? I asked, curious. I don't know, you seem so eccentric, with your unique style. Sometimes I fear we won't understand each other, she confessed, looking down. But I like being this way. I just want you to accept me as I am, I replied, trying to be sincere. The conversation flowed naturally, and little by little, we unearthed the feelings that had pushed us apart. I spoke about how the pressure from school made me feel insecure, while she shared her own struggles. In the end, when we hugged, I felt our friendship was stronger than ever. The watch, which had once been just an unknown object, now seemed to have given me a new perspective. I hadn't just undone a mistake, I had strengthened a bond that could have been lost. That night, I lay in bed with a smile on my face. I looked at the watch, now resting beside me. It was not just a relic of memories, it was a key to the past and possibly to the future. What else can you show me? I asked as I closed my eyes and let dreams take me to unknown places. Curious about the powers of the watch my grandmother had left me, I decided to test its abilities again. After the incident with Samantha, I felt more confident but also a bit apprehensive. What else could I change? And at what cost? The watch, with its antique shine, seemed to pulse before me, as if calling me for a new adventure. That sunny afternoon, I was in the garage, surrounded by boxes of junk my mother insisted on keeping. The smell of dust and old wood filled the air, and I wondered if I would ever have the courage to get rid of those things. But what truly interested me at that moment was the watch. I held it firmly, feeling its weight in my hand. What can you do for me now? I murmured, almost expecting an answer. I decided to test the watch on a small accident that had happened the previous day. I vividly remembered the moment when, while trying to ride my bike, I lost my balance and fell. The pain in my knee was still fresh in my memory. Maybe I can avoid that, I thought as I spun the watch in my hand. The hand that usually moved forward now turned slowly backward. A strange sensation enveloped me, as if I were being pulled by an invisible force. Suddenly, I found myself back in the park, sunlight filtering through the leaves of the trees. The gentle breeze caressed my face as I rode my bike, smiling, carefree. It was such a simple moment, yet so precious. When I reached the spot where I had fallen, I hesitated. What would I do now? To my surprise, instinct guided me. Instead of trying a daring maneuver, I simply slowed down and maintained my balance. This is amazing! I shouted, feeling a rush of relief and happiness. The sense of control was new and refreshing, and I couldn't help but smile widely. But as I pedaled, the euphoria began to fade, and a small shadow of concern emerged. What else could happen? What was I truly changing? When I returned home, I found Alex leaning against the front wall, arms crossed, watching the street. He shot me a curious glance, and I knew he was wondering what I had done. "Hey, Emily. You look different. What happened?" he asked, his voice tinged with a mix of concern and curiosity. "You won't believe it, but I used the watch again," I replied, trying not to let my nervousness show. "You used the watch? What for this time?" he pressed, leaning slightly forward. I had a small bicycle accident that I wanted to avoid. And it worked. I managed not to fall, I confessed, a spontaneous smile spreading across my face. "That's amazing, but aren't you worried that it might have consequences? Time isn't something you can just manipulate," he said, with a look of concern that I didn't expect. I know. But I can't help my curiosity. What if there was a way to, I don't know, fix things? To make everything better? I argued, trying to justify my decision. But what if you end up making everything worse? Sometimes, the bad things teach us lessons we need to learn, Alex replied, his voice soft but firm. I looked at him, realizing he was right. There was a weight to his words that I couldn't ignore. At the same time, a part of me was so eager to discover more about the watch and its powers that I didn't want to stop. Maybe you're right. But what if we could use this to help others? To find out what happened to Lucy? I said, quickly changing the subject. Alex raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What do you mean? I've heard some stories about her disappearance. What if we could find clues? If the watch can help me go back in time, maybe I can find out what really happened, I said, feeling the adrenaline surge. The idea of solving a mystery excited me, and the possibility of finding answers to questions that loomed over my life was irresistible. You know, this could be dangerous, right? What if you change something you shouldn't? He questioned, but I noticed a spark of excitement in his eyes. I know, but I feel like I need to do this. Lucy doesn't deserve to be forgotten. And my grandmother, well, I have a feeling there's something more she never told me, I said, determination growing within me. So, what do you suggest? Alex asked, a slight smile appearing on his lips. Let's investigate. We need to gather information, talk to people who know the story. And maybe, if we find something convincing, I can use the watch to go back to an important moment, I suggested, full of enthusiasm. We decided that the next day, we would go to the local library. The idea of diving into Lucy's story and my grandmother's filled me with excitement. The library was a place that had always fascinated me, with its shelves full of old books and documents. I could spend hours there, lost in stories and secrets of the past. That night, I could barely sleep. My mind was filled with possibilities and questions. What would I find? What could the watch really do? And, more importantly, was I ready to face the truths that might emerge? The next day, Alex and I arrived at the library right after it opened. The smell of aged paper and the soft light filtering through the windows created a perfect environment for our search. Let's head straight to the local history section, I suggested, pointing to the shelf right in front of us. Surely, there must be something about Lucy there, Alex agreed, starting to pull out some books and pamphlets. As we flipped through the pages, we found several references to Lucy, but it was an old newspaper article from decades ago that truly caught our attention. Look at this, I said, pointing to a paragraph that spoke of a forbidden love. It says there was an artist involved, and this had something to do with my grandmother. That's interesting. Did your grandmother know Lucy? Alex asked, his expression becoming more intense. I don't know, but I need to find out. If this story is true, maybe the watch has an even deeper connection to all of this, I replied, my mind buzzing with ideas. We continued researching, and with each new piece of information we uncovered, our excitement grew. What else could we discover about Lucy? And how did this connect to my grandmother? Questions swirled in my head, but I was determined to find the answers. Let's go home and think of a plan. I want to use the watch again, but we need to make sure we're doing the right thing, I said to Alex as we left the library. I'm with you, Emily. But remember, sometimes it's better to leave the past where it is, he replied, though I noticed a glimmer of support in his eyes. I can't. I need to know, I affirmed, and as we walked home together, I felt the truth was closer than ever. Ah, the library. The smell of old books and the soft light filtering through the windows brought me a sense of security. Alex and I were there, surrounded by shelves that seemed endless. He was flipping through a worn leather-bound book while I tried to focus on the research about Lucy's disappearance. The idea that her story could be intertwined with mine intrigued and scared me a little. Emily, look at this. Alex exclaimed, catching my attention. He was pointing to an article on a yellowed page. This talks about Lucy, it says she had a forbidden love. This could give us a clue. I stepped closer, my heart racing. The article spoke of a young artist, someone who seemed to have captured Lucy's heart in a way that transcended time. I read the words eagerly, feeling the connection that love could have with my grandmother. Alex, my grandmother was close to Lucy. This can't be a coincidence. Do you think your grandmother knew something? That she might have hidden this? Alex seemed just as engaged as I was. His enthusiasm was contagious. Maybe. But what intrigues me is how a love could lead someone to disappear. What happened to Lucy? And how does this connect to my grandmother's story? We need to find out more. Let's talk to the older residents. They might know something. I agreed, but a shadow of doubt loomed over me. I had the feeling we were digging into something that should remain buried. As soon as we left the library, a wave of anxiety hit me. What else would we discover? In the following days, Alex and I became almost like detectives. We talked to neighbors who remembered Lucy and my grandmother. Some seemed reluctant to share, while others were swept away by nostalgia. Each story we heard added new layers to the mystery, and the connection between Lucy and my grandmother became increasingly clear. Have you noticed how everyone talks about Lucy's love as if it were something forbidden? Alex commented one day after visiting a lady who lived next door. It's like there's a weight to this story. That's true. And it makes me wonder, what happened? Why couldn't they be together? I was becoming more immersed in the story. Curiosity burned within me like a flame that couldn't be extinguished. One afternoon, we decided to meet at the park. The sun was beginning to set, creating a perfect backdrop to discuss our findings. The gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees as we sat on a bench. Emily, I need to tell you something, Alex began, his serious tone catching my attention. Since we started this investigation, I feel like we're getting close to something big. But I also feel something more. My heart raced. What do you mean? He hesitated, looking at the ground before meeting my gaze again. I like you, Emily. And I don't know if I'm doing the right thing by telling you this now, but it's true. I feel like we have a connection that goes beyond friendship. I fell silent, processing his words. What should I say? I liked him too, but I was so focused on Lucy, on my grandmother and the watch that connected me to all of this, that I didn't know if I could handle another emotional complication. Alex, I like you too, but now isn't the right time. We have to find out what happened to Lucy. Frustration and confusion were written on my face. He took a deep breath, understanding, but the look on his face seemed disappointed. I get it. Let's focus on what matters. But I don't want you to think this isn't important to me too. You are important to me, Alex. Hashtag, just, let me process all of this. The conversation shifted to other topics, but Alex's revelation lingered between us like an unwanted fog. I felt torn, but the quest for truth was stronger than any feelings I might have. In the following days, the investigation continued, and each new clue brought more questions. One day, while we were reviewing some notes at my house, I mentioned a detail that had been bothering me. Alex, have you ever thought about what happened to the artist? He might be the key to all of this. What do we know about him? We don't have much information. But if Lucy was in love with him and he was connected to her grandmother, maybe we can find more details about their relationship. Who knows, he might have left behind a letter or something, Alex suggested. Determined, I decided I needed to learn more. Let's go to the library again. We should search for any mention of this artist. When we arrived at the library, the search intensified. We scoured local history books, old newspapers, and any information that might have been recorded. Time seemed to drag on until we finally found a reference to the artist in one of the newspapers. Look at this. I said, pointing to an eye-catching headline, "Local artist disappears under mysterious circumstances." The article talked about the artist's talent and his love for Lucy, but it also mentioned her family's disapproval. It seems their love was not only forbidden but also brought tragic consequences. This is a sign. We need to find out more about this artist and what happened to him. This could be the missing piece of the puzzle, Alex said, his excitement renewed. As we talked, the idea of using the watch again began to circulate in my mind. What if it could take us to a crucial moment in their history? The thought left me hesitant. I had already used the watch to reverse small mistakes in my life, but now we were dealing with something much larger. Alex, do you think we should use the watch to go back to a time when the artist was alive? To see what really happened between him and Lucy? I asked, half apprehensive. It might be risky, but it could be our only way of understanding what happened. We can't let fear hold us back. This is our chance, he replied. Those words echoed in my mind. The curiosity and determination to uncover the truth outweighed my fear. I knew I needed to make a decision, and I quickly found myself wavering between what was right and what was safe. Okay, let's use the watch. But we need to be prepared for what we might find, I said, resolute. Alex nodded, and together we began to plan how to use the watch. The idea of reliving moments from the past was frightening, but the need to understand what happened to Lucy and her connection to my grandmother was stronger. That night, as I prepared to use the watch, a mix of anticipation and fear settled in my heart. What would we discover? What would we see? And most importantly, how would this change everything we knew so far? The pressure was building in my chest like an unbearable weight. I didn't know how to deal with my mother's expectations, which seemed to grow with each passing day. The watch I inherited from my grandmother, once a symbol of connection and nostalgia, now felt like a burden. I found myself staring at it, spinning it between my fingers, as if I could uncover the answer to all my doubts. But instead, it only reminded me of the widening chasm between my mother and me. That afternoon, after yet another argument about my obsession with the past, I entered my room, throwing my backpack in the corner. The watch was there, gleaming in the dim sunlight filtering through the window, as if it were calling to me. Maybe I should try again, I thought. Maybe I can undo this fight. With a sigh, I put the watch on my wrist and closed my eyes. The sensation was familiar, as if time were adjusting around me. I wanted to go back to the moment my mother and I had argued about my research. The heat of anger still burned in my memory, but I was determined to find a way around it. The image around me began to swirl, and when I opened my eyes, I was back in the living room, moments before the argument began. My mother was sitting on the couch, a worried expression on her face, while I was standing, nervous. Emily, she began, I really don't understand why you're so obsessed with this. It won't change anything. You don't understand, Mom. I need to know what happened to Lucy. It's part of our history, of our family. I could feel the frustration rising again, but this time I wanted to find a way to navigate it. This story isn't yours to tell. You're getting involved in something you have no idea about. She raised her voice, and my heart raced. But I didn't want the conversation to go that way. But what if I can discover something that helps? What if Lucy was more than just a stranger? What if she's part of me? My voice trembled, but I was determined not to let anger drive us apart again. Emily, you need to stop this. The tone of her voice was firm, almost desperate. You can't change what happened. You can't save anyone. Her words echoed in me like a haunting refrain. I knew the argument was escalating again, and I had to act quickly. Please, just listen to me. I know you have your reasons, but I just want to understand. I don't want this to come between us. She hesitated, looking at me with a mix of exhaustion and concern. I just want you to focus on things that really matter. Life isn't about reliving the past. But what if the past is the key to understanding the present? To understanding who we are? I didn't want her to realize it, but I was beginning to feel that my words were as true as the doubts that plagued me. You need to let this go. Please, Emily. The frustration in her voice was palpable, and I could feel the tension rising between us. I decided it was time to act. Mom, I promise that if you give me a chance, I'll show you that this can help us connect, to better understand our family. I needed her to see what I saw, to understand that this watch could be the answer to many of our questions. She stared at me for a long moment, and I knew she was weighing my words. "I don't know if this is a good idea," she finally said, her voice calmer but still laden with worry. "Please, just give me a chance," I pleaded, feeling a spark of hope ignite within me. "I don't want you and me to be like this. I just want to know the truth." She sighed, and for a moment, I thought she might relent. "Okay," she said slowly. "But if you get hurt, I won't take responsibility for it." "I promise I'll be careful," I replied with a hesitant smile, feeling that maybe, just maybe, this could bring us together. But the feeling that I was opening a Pandora's box wouldn't leave me. What was I really about to discover? However, the conversation didn't go as I expected. When I returned to the present, I realized that nothing had changed. The tension we had created during the argument still hung in the air like a dark cloud. The feeling of defeat enveloped me, and the watch felt heavier on my wrist. What did I really hope to achieve by trying to undo the words spoken? The truth was, even when we try to correct mistakes, the wounds remain open. Night fell, and I found myself lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. The watch was still there, but now it seemed like just an object, devoid of the magic I had hoped for. My mother's anger, the frustration I felt at not being able to achieve what I wanted, all of it swirled in a whirlwind of emotions. I wanted to understand my mother, but it felt like every attempt to get closer only pushed her further away. The next day brought a new wave of doubts. I couldn't focus at school, my thoughts were tangled in conversations I couldn't have. When Alex found me in the cafeteria, I noticed he looked worried. "Hey, are you okay? You look, different," he said, tilting his head to the side. "I'm just a little tired," I tried to deflect, but he didn't seem convinced. "Do you want to talk about it? About what's going on with your mom? I've noticed you're pulling away from her," he suggested, his voice gentle. I felt a tightening in my heart. "I don't know if I can," I replied honestly. I feel like I'm in a maze and can't find my way out." "Sometimes talking helps," he insisted, his worried gaze making me want to open my heart. But I hesitated. How could I explain to him the weight of expectations and the secrets looming over my family? "I'm just trying to understand things," I finally confessed. "The clock, my grandmother's story, Lucy, everything is mixing in my head. And when I try to sort it out, it seems like it just gets worse." Alex paused, reflecting on my words. "I understand. But you don't have to carry this alone. You know you can count on me, right?" I felt warmth rise in my cheeks. He had always been there for me, and it made me realize I didn't want to push him away. "I know, Alex. It's just that I don't want you to get hurt because of my decisions." He smiled lightly, but there was concern in his eyes. "I worry about you, Emily. I don't want you to get hurt. Sometimes the truth is hard to face, but confronting it can be liberating." His words echoed in my mind. The truth. That was what I was searching for, but at what cost? As I pondered this, I realized that regardless of what I discovered, Alex would always be there to support me. And that, in itself, was a relief. But as school continued around us, the pressure in my mind did not lessen. How could I continue my search for the truth without causing more harm? How could I deal with my mother's pain while still uncovering the secrets the clock promised to reveal? The answer remained out of reach, and as the hours passed, I felt more lost than ever. It was a constant battle between the need to discover and the desire to protect. And deep down, I knew that no matter how things were, the only way to move forward would be to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. That morning, the sunlight streamed through my bedroom window, illuminating the clock I had inherited from my grandmother. It seemed to glow in an almost magical way, and I couldn't help but wonder about the secrets it held. Alex had encouraged me to investigate Lucy's disappearance, and I was determined to uncover the truth. I remembered the elderly neighbor, Mrs. Clara, who always talked about the history of our street and might have valuable information for us. After a quick coffee, I decided it was time to visit her. I walked to her house, feeling a mix of anxiety and anticipation. With each step, Lucy's story echoed in my mind. What had happened to that young woman? What connected her to my grandmother? When I arrived at Mrs. Clara's door, I hesitated for a moment, but then knocked. The sound resonated, and soon I heard footsteps approaching. "Who is it?" asked a familiar hoarse voice. "It's me, Emily. Can I come in?" I replied, trying to contain my anxiety. The door slowly opened, revealing the hunched figure of Mrs. Clara. Her eyes sparkled with a wisdom that only age can bring. "Oh, Emily, dear. Come in, come in. It's been so long since I've seen you." She greeted me with a tight hug. "Hi, Mrs. Clara. I came because I'm curious about Lucy. Do you remember her?" I asked as I settled into the small room filled with old photographs and dark wooden furniture. She furrowed her brow, her gaze distant as if recalling something long past. "Lucy, yes, such a beautiful girl, a young woman full of dreams." Mrs. Clara sighed. "She got involved with an artist, and that ended up being her fate." "Artist?" My curiosity heightened. "Can you tell me more about that?" Mrs. Clara nodded, picking up a glass of water and offering it to me. "Oh, but that is a painful story, my dear. The love Lucy felt was not welcomed. Her family disapproved, and the artist, well, he wasn't an ordinary person. There were rumors about him, strange things." "What do you mean by strange?" I asked, the tension rising inside me. "They said he had a supernatural talent, something beyond art. He could capture people's souls in his paintings. But there was a price to pay." Mrs. Clara looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and compassion. And Lucy, she didn't know what she was getting into. A chill ran down my spine. What did that artist have to do with my grandmother? The clock on my wrist seemed to pulse, as if trying to warn me of something important. And my grandmother? What does she have to do with Lucy? I asked, urgency growing in my voice. Mrs. Clara hesitated, her gaze drifting off again. "Your grandmother was friends with Lucy. They were inseparable in their youth. But when Lucy disappeared, your grandmother was so devastated that she changed. No one knew what really happened. Grief consumed her. She looked at me, her eyes now filled with sadness. What are you searching for, Emily? I'm trying to understand. I feel like the clock can help me." As I spoke, I looked at the object on my wrist, its shiny surface reflecting the light in the room. I've been using it. It allows me to go back in time, to undo mistakes. Mrs. Clara's eyes widened, shock evident on her face. "Be careful, my dear. Time is a treacherous thing. Sometimes we shouldn't meddle with what has already been. The consequences can be devastating. But I need to know the truth." I insisted, feeling a growing determination. "I can't just ignore what happened to Lucy. I understand your desire, but remember, sometimes it's better to leave the past in peace." She stood up and walked to a shelf, pulling out a dusty book. "Here, look at this. It's an old article about Lucy. It might help you understand a bit more." I took the book from her hands, feeling the dust accumulate under my fingers. The cover was worn, but the pages were intact. I began to flip through it, and soon found a photo of Lucy. She was beautiful, with wavy hair and a radiant smile. But then my attention was drawn to a specific paragraph. Lucy was known for her forbidden love. Many believed her connection with the artist led to a tragic fate, but few knew the true story behind her disappearance. "What does that mean?" I asked, frustrated. Mrs. Clara sighed again, as if preparing to reveal something she had held on to for a long time. "The artist, His name was Raphael. He was talented, but had a dark reputation. He was involved in things most people couldn't comprehend. When Lucy disappeared, many believed she had run away with him. But the truth is much more complicated. How so? I interrupted, eager for more details. There were rumors that he had made a pact, something that could give him power in exchange for souls. Your grandmother, it seems, knew about it and tried to protect her. But she couldn't. I was in shock. The idea that my grandmother had tried to protect Lucy from a terrible fate, only to fail, was overwhelming. The clock on my wrist seemed to pulse again, as if calling out to me. And what if I can undo this? I murmured, more to myself than to Mrs. Clara. Emily, don't do it. Mrs. Clara exclaimed, her voice desperate. Sometimes, what has been lost should remain lost. What you're searching for could cost more than you can imagine. But I was determined. The connection between my grandmother and Lucy felt stronger than I had thought. I needed to understand what had happened, and the clock could be the key. Thank you, Mrs. Clara. I will investigate further. I bid her farewell, feeling the weight of her words in my heart. As I walked back home, my mind raced. I needed to talk to Alex about all of this. ####, he has always been my support, and now, more than ever, I needed him by my side. When I got home, I found Alex sitting on the couch, focused on his phone. He looked up when I entered, and his smile gave me a bit of relief. Hey, Emily. What did you find out? He seemed excited, and that gave me the courage to share. I sat down beside him and began to tell him everything about my visit with Dona Clara, the revelations about Lucy, and the artist. As I spoke, I sensed that with each word, the pressure in my chest grew. I was about to open a door that I might not be able to close again. So, you want us to go after this artist? Alex asked, clearly concerned but also intrigued. Not exactly. I want to understand what really happened to Lucy and how it connects to my grandmother. I replied, looking at him seriously. It could be dangerous, but I feel we need to. Emily, you know I'm with you, but, what about the watch? You're not thinking about using it again, are you? He hesitated, worry evident in his eyes. I don't know. I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. I just want to know the truth. But at the same time, Dona Clara warned me about the risks. Maybe we should start investigating without using the watch. The truth can be painful, but we need to face it head-on. Alex suggested, his tone firm. I knew he was right. But the temptation of the watch, the promise of being able to turn back time and correct mistakes, was something I couldn't ignore. All right, let's find more information first. But I can't promise I won't use the watch if I feel it's necessary. I declared, determination shining in my heart again. I understand. And I'll be by your side, no matter what happens. Alex looked me in the eyes, and in that moment, I realized I wasn't alone in this quest. The connection between Lucy, my grandmother, and the artist was becoming clearer, and with each passing day, I felt closer to the truth. And even though there were risks, I was determined to discover what really happened and how it shaped my story. The truth was within our reach, and I wouldn't stop until I found it. As I delved deeper into researching the artist linked to my grandmother and Lucy's story, a sense of unease settled in me. There was something sinister in the way the pieces of the past began to fit together, as if a dark puzzle was slowly revealing itself. The local library, which had once seemed a safe and familiar place, was now becoming a labyrinth of secrets and mysteries. The next day, after a restless night, Alex and I decided to meet again to discuss the information we had found. He looked anxious, with a worried expression that didn't go unnoticed. Emily, are you okay? You look like you didn't sleep well, he commented as soon as he saw me at the library entrance. I couldn't stop thinking about my grandmother and Lucy. What else do you know about the artist? I asked, trying to hide the apprehension consuming me. Alex hesitated for a moment. I found some old letters in the library, documents that talk about a troubled relationship between your grandmother and that artist. It seems they were very close before everything went wrong. I frowned, feeling a strange mix of curiosity and fear. What do you mean by everything went wrong? What happened between them? I don't know the details, but the letters mention a marriage that never happened and a lot of rumors in the community. Some people said he got involved with another woman, and, well, it caused a lot of drama, Alex explained, glancing around as if fearing someone might overhear our conversation. His words echoed in my mind. A marriage that never happened. A lost love. Was this the reason my grandmother never spoke about her youth? There was a weight to that story that seemed to pull me down, as if I were being sucked into an invisible gravity. We need to know more. This could be linked to Lucy's disappearance, I said, my voice trembling slightly. If Lucy's grandmother was involved with this artist, maybe what happened to her is connected to my grandmother's story. We have to investigate further. Alex agreed, but his expression showed that he was also worried about what we might find. Just be careful, Emily. Sometimes, it's better to leave secrets buried. But I couldn't simply ignore this. There was a growing need inside me, a desire to uncover the truth, not just for Lucy, but also for my grandmother. I needed to understand who she really was and what had happened in her life. That afternoon, we decided to visit a small local museum that had a section dedicated to the town's history and its inhabitants. The place was almost empty, except for an elderly lady with white hair organizing some books. As soon as we entered, a wave of nostalgia hit me. The smell of aged paper and the soft sound of footsteps echoing on the wooden floor reminded me of the afternoon spent at the library with my grandmother. Hi, can we ask some questions about the town's history? I asked the lady. She turned, a gentle smile lighting up her face. Of course, my young friends. What would you like to know? We're investigating the disappearance of a young girl named Lucy, which happened a long time ago. We know she was connected to a love story with an artist who also had ties to Emily's grandmother, Alex explained. The lady's expression changed. Ah, Lucy. A sad story indeed. She was a vibrant girl, but her disappearance left deep scars in the community. Many people still remember her. Do you know anything about the artist? I asked, anxious. That artist, he had incredible talent, but his life was full of turmoil. His name was Raphael. The connection he had with your grandmother is more complex than it seems. They were in love, but there was something dark in their relationship, she replied, her voice trembling slightly. Dark how? I inquired, my curiosity intensifying. Rumors. There were always rumors. They said he made a pact to achieve success, and that this pact required something in return. Something very costly, the lady said, looking down as if remembering something painful. What did he have to give in return? Alex asked, intrigued. Oh dear, that's something few would dare to say. Some believe that the pact cost Lucy her life. Her tragedy is intertwined with the story of your grandmother and Raphael. A true curse. No one ever knew for sure what happened that fateful night, she replied, her gaze distant. My hands trembled. The lady's words pierced me like a sharp blade, cutting through the surface of my certainties. And my grandmother? What did she have to do with this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Your grandmother was Lucy's friend. They were inseparable. And when Lucy disappeared, your grandmother was devastated. It is believed she distanced herself from Raphael because of what happened. She was never the same after that, the lady said, now with a voice full of compassion. I need to understand more about my grandmother and this story. Can you help us? I pleaded, feeling that each new piece of the puzzle was bringing me closer to the truth. The lady hesitated, looking at us with a concerned expression. It's dangerous to dig too deep. Sometimes, it's better to let the past rest. But I need to know. My grandmother and Lucy deserve for the truth to be uncovered, I said, determination taking hold of me. Then you must visit the place where Lucy disappeared. There may be answers there. But be careful. The past has a way of manifesting in unexpected ways, she warned, her words sounding like a caution. As soon as we left the museum, the idea of visiting the place of Lucy's disappearance began to consume me. I needed to see with my own eyes the place that had held so many secrets. As we walked through the streets, Alex watched me with concern, but said nothing. You're determined, aren't you? He asked, breaking the silence. Yes. Hashtag, I need to understand. I can't just ignore this, Alex. Something tells me the answer is right here, I replied, feeling adrenaline coursing through my veins. Just be careful, Emily. I don't want you to get hurt, he said, holding my hand protectively. I know. But I can't give up now, I insisted, determination burning in my heart. Finally, we arrived at the spot where Lucy had disappeared. It was a clearing in the forest, surrounded by tall trees that seemed to whisper secrets. The place was abandoned and covered in dry leaves, but there was a sense that something still lingered in the air. I could feel Lucy's presence, as if she were there, waiting for someone to find her. This is strange, Alex murmured, glancing around suspiciously. Yeah, but I need to use the watch here. Maybe I'll see something that can help us, I said, pulling the watch from my pocket. The sensation of holding it was intense, as if it were vibrating with a life of its own. Emily, are you sure about this? What if something goes wrong? Alex asked, his concern evident. I don't know anything for sure, but I have to try. If the watch can really take me to another time, maybe I can understand what happened to Lucy. And if my grandmother is involved, I need to know the truth, I replied, resolute. With one last look at Alex, I activated the watch. The sensation was instantaneous, a wave of vertigo that made me feel as though I was being pulled backward. The trees around me began to spin, and the clearing distorted until it completely vanished. When I finally regained consciousness, I was in a different scene. It was the same clearing, but it seemed alive. The trees were full of leaves and flowers, and laughter filled the air. I followed the sound and soon saw two female figures. One was my grandmother, young and radiant, and the other was Lucy, with a mischievous smile. I shouldn't be here, I thought, but I couldn't help myself. They looked so happy, so carefree. Promise me you'll never leave me, okay? Lucy asked, holding my grandmother's hand. Of course not, Lucy. We'll always be together, my grandmother replied, the light in her eyes illuminating the surroundings. The moment was magical, but soon a shadow crossed Lucy's face. What if something happens? What if he comes back? Don't worry about that. We'll face everything together. Always, my grandmother said, trying to comfort her. But suddenly, the atmosphere began to shift. The joy turned to tension. A male figure appeared, a tall man with a dark expression. I realized it was Raphael. My heart raced in my chest. Lucy, we need to talk. The sunlight streamed through my bedroom window, casting dancing shadows on the wall. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, the watch from my grandmother resting in my hands. The gleaming piece seemed to pulse with its own energy, as if it were alive. Since I inherited that object, my life had changed in ways I could never have imagined. But now, I found myself at an impasse, a dilemma that consumed me. The truth about my grandmother and her connections to Lucy's disappearance haunted me, but the weight of the revelations I had uncovered was beginning to crumble what I believed to be my family. That morning, tension hung in the air. My mother had called me for a talk, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. The watch was there, a constant reminder that the past could be shaped, but the truths it brought to light were immutable. I took a deep breath and descended the stairs, feeling as if a storm could erupt at any moment. Emily, we need to talk, my mother said as soon as I entered the room. Her tone was firm, but I could sense a subtle tremor betraying her anxiety. She looked at me with those tired eyes, and I realized that somewhere inside her, there was a mother who was just as lost as I was. "What about, Mom?" I asked, trying to keep calm. "About your obsession with that watch and this whole Lucy thing. It's not healthy, Emily." She crossed her arms, a clear defense, but I couldn't just ignore what was at stake. "But I need to understand. Lucy disappeared, and it seems my grandmother was involved somehow. I can't just let this go." I felt urgency in my own eyes, my heart racing. "Mom, you know something, don't you? You were with her when it happened." She hesitated, looking at the floor as if the answers were there, but she couldn't find them. "You don't know what you're asking, Emily. Some truths are too painful. I don't want you to get hurt any more than you already are. But I'm already hurt. It's not just about Lucy, it's about us too. Why have you never talked about Grandma? What else are you hiding from me?" Frustration poured from my words, and I could feel my anger beginning to overflow. "Because I wanted to protect you," she shouted, her voice echoing off the walls. "Your grandmother, she made terrible choices. You have no idea what she went through. I don't want you to get involved in this, Emily. It's dangerous." "Dangerous how? How can knowing the truth be dangerous?" I exploded, feeling like the ground beneath my feet was crumbling. "I want to know who I am. If my grandmother had secrets, then I might have them too." My mother's expression softened, but the pain in her eyes was evident. "You don't need to carry that burden. I just wanted you to have a normal life, away from all this mess," she murmured, her voice now calm but filled with sadness. "Normal? What is normal? Being like everyone else at school, being the target of jokes because of my quirky appearance? Do you think that's normal?" I was on the verge of tears, but I couldn't give up. I want to understand why Grandma and Lucy were connected. What happened between them? The tension was at its peak, and I could feel the pressure in the air. "Emily, you don't know what you're asking for. Your grandmother's story is full of pain and regret. She had to make tough decisions. I don't want you to dig this up. Life is hard enough. If life is hard, then I want to know why. If you don't tell me, I'll find out on my own," I said, determined. The resolve within me grew, a flame unwilling to extinguish. My mother's expression changed, and I could tell she was questioning whether I was really ready for what I might discover. "Sometimes, it's better to leave the past where it belongs," she whispered, but there was desperation in her voice that made me hesitate. "But I can't. I can't keep living like this, not knowing. What if it affects my life somehow? What if what happened to Lucy happens to me?" I felt my heart tighten, the fear that history could repeat itself in my own life. She took a deep breath, as if trying to organize her thoughts. "When I was young, your grandmother was a woman full of dreams and hopes. She fell in love with an artist, and it was a disaster. What happened to Lucy was a tragedy that everyone tried to forget. I don't want you to get involved in this. I don't want you to suffer as she did. Why didn't you tell me this before? I need to understand," I pleaded. "If Lucy and Grandma were connected somehow, maybe I can find out what really happened." Because I didn't know how to explain it. "Life is full of choices, and some of them have consequences that last a lifetime," she replied, her voice now choked with emotion. "You're opening a Pandora's box, Emily. And I can't let you do that." I felt a wave of despair wash over me. "Mom, please. I just need a chance to understand the truth. If Grandma made sacrifices, maybe I can honor that. I don't want to live in the shadows of ignorance. And what if you discover something you can't handle?" She was clearly battling her own emotions, the fear of losing me to the pain of the truth. "You don't understand the weight this carries. It's a responsibility you might not be ready to bear." I stared at my mother, feeling the connection between us fade. I'm already carrying this weight, Mom. The difference is that now I want to know what it really means. Hashtag hashtag hashtag, and if that means confronting you or the memory of Grandma, then I'm willing to do it. The discussion was taking a painful turn, and the tension between us was almost palpable. You don't know what you're saying, Emily. You're just a teenager. These stories are from a past I would prefer to forget, she replied, her voice breaking. Maybe I'm a teenager, but that doesn't mean I don't have the right to know the truth, I said, determined. If you don't want to tell me, then I'll figure it out on my own. I won't give up on this. She looked at me, and I could see the battle happening in her mind. Finally, she sighed, as if releasing a weight. If you really want to know, then you need to be prepared for what you'll find. I'm prepared, I affirmed, though a part of me was terrified at the prospect. Then you need to understand that your grandmother made choices, and not all of them were good. The love she felt for the artist led her to a dark place, and Lucy, she was just a victim in this game of love and pain, my mother began, her tone now softer, but still filled with sadness. What do you mean, a victim? I asked, my heart racing. What happened to Lucy? My mother's expression revealed a story that was far from simple. There was a secret your grandmother kept under lock and key. A forbidden love that intertwined with Lucy's story. When Lucy disappeared, many believed your grandmother was somehow involved. But the truth is that she was trying to protect her, even if it meant sacrificing her own happiness. But what does that have to do with the watch? I asked, increasingly intrigued. Because the watch belonged to your grandmother, and she always believed it had the power to alter fate. But every choice we make has consequences, and you need to be careful what you wish for, she warned, her eyes filled with concern. A chill ran down my spine at the implications. Are you saying the watch can lead me to this truth? That I can change what happened? No, Emily. That's not how things work. What you discover may change everything, but you can't simply go back and change what has already happened. You need to face the consequences, my mother cautioned. I knew there was so much more to this conversation, but the need to understand was greater. I need to know, Mom. I need to know what really happened to Grandma and Lucy. I can't keep living with this uncertainty. My heart was heavy with the internal struggle between wanting to know the truth and fearing what I might find. The connection with my grandmother and with Lucy was forming, and I couldn't just ignore it. Just be careful, please, my mother whispered. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink, as I walked toward the place where Lucy had disappeared. My heart pounded in my chest, not just with the expectation of finding answers, but also with the fear of the unknown. That place, a small clearing surrounded by tall, dense trees, seemed to carry the weight of untold stories. I had read about the tragedy that happened there, but being in the location made me feel a deeper connection, as if the shadows of the past were gathering around me, waiting to be released. As I reached the clearing, a gentle breeze passed by, bringing the scent of wet earth and dry leaves. I looked around and realized everything was abandoned. The bushes grew uncontrollably, and the once majestic trees seemed to be bending under the burden of what they had witnessed. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I couldn't back down. I needed to understand what had happened to Lucy, and more importantly, what connection it had to my grandmother. If you're here, Lucy, give me a sign, I murmured, almost as a whisper, while holding the watch I had inherited from my grandmother. The shine of the silver object reflected the light of the setting sun, and an uncontrollable impulse made me set it in motion. The hands began to turn slowly, and a strange sensation took hold of me, as if I was about to cross a magical door into a past I had never known. I closed my eyes, and in an instant, the colors around me began to blend. When I opened my eyes again, the clearing was no longer the same. The trees had lush green leaves and wildflowers, and the atmosphere was filled with laughter and voices. I had been transported to a moment in the past, and the figures around me were shadows of a reality long gone. Come on, Lucy. You can't fall behind, shouted a girl with blonde hair and a contagious laugh. I recognized the voice. It was Lucy, or at least the version of her I saw there. She was running, her eyes shining with a mix of joy and worry. Beside her, a young man with dark hair followed, laughing and trying to catch up to her. "I can't. You're too fast," he replied, breathless, but his expression was one of pure fun. It was as if they embodied freedom and happiness. But as I watched, a shadow began to form in the background. A male figure, with a dark gaze, was slowly approaching, like a predator lurking. "Lucy, be careful!" I shouted, but my voice did not pierce through time. The scene unfolded before me like a movie, and I was trapped as a powerless spectator. Lucy didn't hear my warning. She continued to run, ignoring the threatening presence that was closing in. "Let's hide here," exclaimed the young man, pulling Lucy toward a hollow tree. But before they could hide, the man appeared, blocking their path. His gaze was intense and carried a weight of secrets. I felt that he was more than just a stranger. There was something deeply connected between him and my grandmother. "You can't run away from me, Lucy," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You know what you are to me. You can't just disappear." His words were loaded with something I couldn't identify. Was it possessiveness? Love? Fear? A mix of emotions that seemed to suffocate the clearing. "I want nothing to do with you," Lucy replied, her voice firm, but I could see the fear in her eyes. The young man beside her hesitated between protecting Lucy and confronting the man. The tension was palpable, and I could feel my heart racing. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run to them, but it was all in vain. I was trapped in the timeline, merely observing. Then, the figure of the man drew closer, and I could see his face more clearly. He was an artist, the same one mentioned in the articles I had read. His gaze was intense, but there was desperation there, as if he was fighting against something he could not control. "You can't leave me," he pleaded, despair evident in his voice. "We were meant to be together, Lucy. You can't just throw all of this away." But Lucy didn't yield. She turned away and, with a scream of determination, ran into the forest, pulling the young man with her. "Go! Now!" Lucy shouted, and they vanished among the trees. The man stood still for a moment, a look of pain on his face. Then he turned and began to walk slowly in the opposite direction, his shoulders slumped, as if life had taken everything from him. The scene began to fade, and I found myself back in the clearing, alone, the sky now dark and heavy with clouds. The connection I had felt before seemed to dissipate, but a new clarity emerged. I hadn't just witnessed a moment from the past, I had seen the truth behind Lucy's disappearance. The connection between my grandmother and that young woman was deeper than I could have imagined. But why? I asked, looking at the watch as if it could answer me. Why had my grandmother never spoken about this? What else was she hiding? My heart ached at the thought of the lies that had accumulated around my family. I needed to know more, understand more, but what I had seen left me confused and scared. The wind began to blow stronger, and I felt the urgency to leave. The clearing now seemed threatening and dark. Hashtag I didn't know what more I could discover there, and the thought of facing more truths was almost unbearable. With the clock still in my hands, I looked up at the now starry sky and closed my eyes once again, wishing to go home but not without taking with me the images and revelations I had just witnessed. "I promise I will uncover the truth," I murmured to myself as the wind gently blew against my face. What I had learned in that brief glimpse of the past was not just about Lucy, it was about my own story, about what it meant to be part of a family that carried secrets and difficult choices. And as much as I wanted to run away, I knew I couldn't. The truth would always find a way to surface. The afternoon light filtered through the window of my room, illuminating the walls covered in band posters and photos of special moments with my friends. But at that moment, everything felt distant and irrelevant. My heart raced, beating out of sync as I tried to organize my thoughts. The visions I had at the place where Lucy disappeared were still fresh in my mind. I felt like I was in a maze, trapped between the past and the present, between what I knew and what I still needed to discover. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. Alex was about to arrive. He had become an anchor for me, someone I could share my fears and insecurities with. But how could I tell him about the visions? What if he didn't believe me? The thought of him doubting me terrified me more than anything I had faced so far. When he finally walked into my room, a smile lit up his face. That smile always had the power to ease some of the pressure in my heart. But today, the tension was palpable. "Hey, Emily. What are you up to?" He looked around, noticing the mess of books and papers piled on my desk. "It seems like you're deep into something serious." "Yeah. I am," I replied hesitantly. "Actually, I had some visions." Alex raised an eyebrow, his interest piqued. "Visions? What are you talking about?" "About Lucy's disappearance," I said, my voice trembling. "I was there, at the place where it all happened. And I saw things. Things I can't explain." He moved a little closer, his expression turning serious. "You're talking about the clock, aren't you? What did you see?" I hesitated, thinking of the images still dancing in my head. I saw my grandmother. And Lucy. There was a connection. Something I can't fully understand. "Emily, this is incredible," he said, excitement shining in his eyes. "You might be close to discovering the truth. What exactly did you see?" I sat on the edge of my bed, nervous. I saw the scene of the disappearance. My grandmother was there, and it seemed like she was trying to protect Lucy from something. But I couldn't see what it was. It was as if something dark was about to happen. And I feel like I need to learn more. He sat down beside me, his presence comforting. "We can do this together. You don't have to face this alone." "I know, but I don't know if I'm ready for what we might discover. What if the truth is worse than I imagine?" "Sometimes, what we don't know is scarier than the truth," he said, looking into my eyes. "But I'll be here, no matter what happens." Those words gave me a bit of courage. "Okay, let's do this. But we need to be cautious. We can't use the clock again until we know more." "I agree. Let's investigate everything we can about Lucy and her connection to your grandmother. We can visit the library again and see if we find anything else in the archives." "Yes, the library. I was already thinking about that. There might be more information there," I said, rising from the bed with a new sense of purpose. "Shall we go now?" "Of course. Let's go," Alex smiled, getting up as well. When we arrived at the library, the atmosphere felt different. The smell of old books and the reverent silence always gave me a sense of peace. But today, there was an urgency in the air. I felt like we were about to uncover something important. We searched for old articles about Lucy, sifting through piles of dusty newspapers and magazines. Alex's full attention was on me, and that gave me strength. With every page we turned, my heart raced more, fueled by hope and fear. Finally, we found an article that looked promising. It was an old photo of a young woman with a dreamy gaze, accompanied by text about her forbidden love for a local artist. The artist's name made my heart race. It was the same artist linked to my grandmother's story. "Look at this, Emily." Alex's voice cut through my trance. "This article mentions your grandmother." My gaze fixed on the image. "Yes, that's her. But what does this have to do with Lucy?" The article spoke about Lucy's love and the pain she felt for not being able to be with the artist. Through the words, I could sense the intensity of passion and despair. But as I continued reading, something struck me. "Alex, do you realize this might mean my grandmother knew more than she was saying?" That perhaps her story was intertwined with Lucy's in a way we never imagined? Yes, and this could be the key to understanding what happened that fateful day, he agreed, his eyes shining. But at the same time, a cold fear began to spread in my stomach. What if the truth is that my grandmother didn't do the right thing? What if, somehow, she was responsible for Lucy's disappearance? Don't think like that. We need to keep an open mind, Alex said, trying to reassure me. Let's keep investigating. We have to understand what really happened. Right, I murmured, even though the anxiety still knotted in my stomach. But that means we need to talk to my mom. She might know more about my grandmother's story, and we need all the information we can get. Are you ready for that? Alex asked, a worried look on his face. No, but we have no choice. I can't let more secrets stay hidden. It's time to face the truth. We returned home in silence, both immersed in our own thoughts. As soon as I stepped inside, my heart was in my throat. I knew the conversation with my mom wouldn't be easy. Mom. I called, my voice echoing down the hallway. She appeared quickly, her gaze fixing on me. Hi, dear. Any news? We need to talk, I said, trying to hide the nervousness in my voice. About Grandma and Lucy. Her expression changed instantly. What are you talking about? I found some things in the library. Anne. I feel like you know more than you're saying. Why didn't you ever tell me about Lucy? The question came out harsher than I intended, but there was no going back. Emily, this is a delicate conversation, my mom said, crossing her arms. It's not something you should be worrying about. But I do worry. Lucy disappeared, and this concerns our family. You have to tell me the truth. My voice was raised, filled with emotion. She hesitated, as if fighting against something inside her. I just want to protect you, dear. Sometimes, the past is better left alone. But I can't. I can't live with this ignorance. What do you know about the artist? What happened between him and Grandma? I was almost pleading. It's not easy to talk about. Your grandmother had her own demons, she whispered, her eyes full of pain. Then tell me. I need to know. I was desperate. It was a forbidden love, Emily. Your grandmother made choices that led her down a dark path. And Lucy. Lucy was caught in the middle of it all, my mom finally admitted, her voice low, as if sharing a secret that shouldn't be spoken. I felt a chill run down my spine. But what happened? What do you know about her disappearance? I don't know everything. Just that it was a tragic day, and your grandmother always blamed herself for it. There are things you don't understand, things I don't know if I should tell you, my mom said, her voice trembling. Please, Mom, I need to know. Hashtag, I can't continue like this. Frustration and anxiety bubbled over inside me. She took a deep breath, as if preparing for what she was about to say. Okay. But you need to promise me that you won't let this consume you. The past can be treacherous. I nodded, even though my mind was racing with questions. I promise. In that moment, I realized that the truth could be much more complicated and painful than I had imagined. And as we talked, the feeling that I was about to discover something that would change everything grew within me. When I last used the watch, a wave of adrenaline surged through my body. I knew I was about to do something that would change everything, but I had no idea how profound that change would be. The light around me began to swirl, and in an instant, I was back on the fateful day Lucy disappeared. The scene was the same, the tranquil lake, the gentle breeze, and the sun shining brightly. But something in the air felt different, as if an invisible tension hung over me. I looked around, absorbing every detail. The trees swayed, and the sound of the water rippling seemed almost like a whisper. This is where it all happened, I thought, feeling my heart race. The decision I had to make was about to reveal itself. The watch pulsed in my hand, as if it were alive, alerting me to the gravity of what was about to happen. Then, I saw Lucy. She was near the shore, laughing and playing with a group of friends. Her smile was radiant, but there was a shadow hanging over her, a presence I couldn't identify. That familiar feeling that something was about to go wrong began to consume me. However, another figure caught my attention, my grandfather, the artist. He was hiding behind a tree, watching Lucy with an intense gaze, a mix of love and pain. "No, no, this can't be," I whispered to myself. I knew something terrible was going to happen, but what? I looked at the watch again, as if it could give me answers. It was as if it was telling me that I had power in my hands, but at what cost? "Emily." Lucy's voice echoed, and my heart stopped for a moment. She was calling for me, but it didn't make sense. I didn't belong to this time. "Come play." She looked so happy, so carefree. I wanted to run to her, to hug her, but something held me back. I had to stay there and watch. In that moment, I realized that the choice I had to make wasn't just about Lucy. It was also about my grandmother. What I had known so far was that my grandmother had made sacrifices, but now it seemed those sacrifices were directly tied to Lucy's fate. What would happen if I saved Lucy? And what would happen if I allowed fate to unfold as it should? "Save her, or save your grandmother," a voice whispered in my mind. It was an impossibly heavy choice. I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. "What would you do, Grandma?" I imagined her response but realized there was no way to know. Then, I saw my grandfather slowly approaching Lucy. He was about to do something that would change everything. "Lucy! Wait!" I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. Time seemed to freeze, and the tension was palpable. He reached out as if he wanted to touch her, but there was something dark in that gesture. I knew he was involved in something I didn't fully understand. "Emily!" Lucy's voice sounded again, but now it was a cry of desperation. "Help me!" That decided it for me. I couldn't let history repeat itself. I needed to save her. With my heart racing and my mind ablaze, I made my choice. "I'm going to save her," I shouted, even knowing that no one could hear me. With that, I activated the watch and felt a surge of energy coursing through my body. The light shone brightly, and everything around me began to spin. I was back to the moment when Lucy was about to disappear. "Emily!" She saw me, and upon recognizing me, her face lit up. "You're here. Come." I ran to her, feeling the urgency pulsing through my veins. "Lucy, don't go near the water," I shouted. But it was too late. The water began to churn violently as if responding to my presence. Time seemed to distort, and I found myself fighting against a whirlwind of invisible forces. "Who are you?" Lucy asked, confused but intrigued. "You look familiar." "I'm Emily." "I'm your friend," I replied, unsure if that was truly the right answer. "You need to get away from the water, now." She hesitated, but something in my gaze convinced her. With a quick motion, she stepped back from the shore, and in that instant, I knew I had made the right choice. But at the same time, I felt something breaking inside me. The connection I had with that moment, with my family's story, was unraveling. "You saved Lucy," a familiar voice sounded behind me. It was my grandmother, young and vibrant, yet with a sad look in her eyes. "But this will have consequences. Why didn't you ever tell me?" I shouted, anger and pain spilling over. "Why did you let this story repeat itself?" "I didn't know how," she replied, her eyes filled with tears. "I did what I could to protect you and your mother. I didn't want you to carry this burden. But I can't live like this, not knowing the truth. I was losing control. The truth needs to be known." "You are right," she said, as the light around us began to shine more intensely. But every choice we make has a price. And then everything began to spin again. I was back in the present, but the consequences of my choice were still fresh in my mind. The watch in my hand was warm, and I knew it had changed. It not only gave me the chance to save Lucy, but it also revealed secrets my grandmother never wanted me to know. "Emily, are you okay?" Alex appeared beside me, his face filled with concern. He had seen the transformation in me, and I knew he was ready to support me, no matter what happened. I made a choice," I replied, struggling to find the words. "I saved Lucy, but now I know my grandmother was involved in something much bigger than I thought." "You don't have to carry this alone," he said, holding my hand. "We're in this together." "But what if this changes everything? What if I find out my grandmother wasn't the person I thought she was?" Uncertainty consumed me. What if all the secrets I uncover aren't just about the past but about who I am now? "Whatever the truth is, it belongs to you," Alex replied, his gaze steady. "And no matter what you discover, I will be here for you." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision I had made. "I think I need to talk to my mom. I need to understand all of this." "Then let's go together," he said, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a wave of hope. The watch was still in my hand, and I knew the journey was far from over. But now, I wouldn't face the future alone. I was ready to uncover the truth, not just about my grandmother and Lucy but about myself. The connection I felt to the past was strong, but the strength Alex provided was unbreakable. Together, we would face it all.